Coming up this week on the Markcast, does spring football have an identity crisis? With the USFL's proud goal of getting players signed to the NFL and the XFL following suit, is the turnover of the XFL and the USFL sustainable? We discuss.
Who am I? I don't know. I guess I have a lot of things to ponder.
In the words of the great Derek Zoolander, I guess both of these leagues have a lot to ponder. And we have a wonderful slate of guests, CFL insider, TSN's own Dave Naylor sharing his thoughts on CFL Week 12, plus the XFL, USFL developmental debate.
When the goal of your team is to have as many players on your team, not on your team next year, I don't know that that's really inviting to fans, right? Because what do fans want to do? They want to buy a jersey, right? They want to they got to know who the players are. They want to know their stories. They want to identify.
We talk with Jake Russell of the Washington Post.
I think there has to be a balance between, okay, part of our role as, not necessarily a minor league, football league, but, something that will never match the NFL, at least in our lifetimes. We have to balance the idea of, we want our players to advance. That's the whole point. That is one of our biggest attractions, is having players come into our league for the shot to play in the NFL.
Joined by longtime CFL journalist Marty York.
I still saw empty seats in Vancouver, and I've seen empty seats in Winnipeg, and what a dominant team they are. Not as many as elsewhere, I might say, but still, I'm seeing too many empty seats. There are more empty seats than filled seats in eastern cities, specifically Toronto. And I find that really, the only word I can think of is sad. And I do know that the league is going to, at some point, say, we can't afford to lose this kind of money anymore.
And then fresh off his game-winning field goal kick, David Côté of the Montreal Alouettes. Should be a good show. Thanks as always. Take care. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Thank you all so much for stopping by today. It should be a really good show this week. I got an eclectic group of guests, lots of CFL content as always, lots of XFL and USFL talk as well, trying to kind of workshop what is the theme title for this week. Sort of the same subject kept coming up again, the same topic, talking with Dave Naylor and Jake Russell about the XFL, USFL. Where we're trying to push players, the goal going to the NFL, is that sustainable? Do people want to watch that? Is that, the great words of Arash Madani about a year ago now on the podcast, are people wanting to watch the show where players are trying to get to the show? That whole thing. Really interesting conversations today. I hope you enjoy. Don't read too much into the sustainability of spring football, but I thought that was a good jumping off point today to kind of build some topic and discussion around. As I said, wonderful slate of guests this week. We have Dave Naylor. I always appreciate Dave taking time to come on. We had Farhan on last week, Dave this week. Those two, great, wonderful, resources talking XFL, CFL, and USFL. Lots of great talk with Dave about, the Nathan Rourke of it all, Mason Fine, Cody Fajardo. What are we doing there? Both Levi Mitchell and the mayor, friend of the show, Jake Mayer, in Calgary. Really appreciate Dave's time. Jake Russell joining us from the Washington Post. He covers, obviously, the XFL there as well as sports for the DC area, with the Washington Post. Really appreciate Jake sharing his thoughts as well, kind of this budding, like I said, just a conversation I want to have about, trying to get casual viewers interested in these leagues outside of the niche audiences that both of them have already. And, is developing players, like Coach Anthony Beck said on our show a couple weeks ago when we interviewed him at the Arizona Showcase, my goal would be to get every one of my players into an NFL training camp the next year, which is obviously great and admirable. But is that enough? Is that enough to, entice viewers to watch the XFL for, 12 weeks here, whatever, coming up in February? We will see. Really great. I appreciate Jake coming on. And then we have a longtime CFL. He was one of the first panelists on the CFL on TSL panel years ago. Marty York joining the show. I've seen Marty tweet a lot online recently about, everything going on in the world of the CFL. Really appreciate Marty stopping by to talk. We go through the big Nathan Rourke injury, talk quarterbacks and team storylines, everything with Marty throughout the CFL season. Really appreciate Marty's time coming on. And then we have David Côté, courtesy of Francis and the team over at the Montreal Alouettes. Fresh off the game-winning field goal kick against the Hamilton Tiger Cats at the end of last week's CFL action. David's great. I love it. Anytime I can interview a CFL player, but I thought David was especially good. I'm going to toss to the interviews now. I don't want to, preface too much. At the end of the show, I have a big giveaway update, everything we're doing for the 2,500 subscribers. And then I kind of have a show and tell with all the items I got. But just to tease you, this is going to be the item that we are going to be giving away. They're getting it in camera view for the 2,500 subscriber giveaway. I have, this is an official game played ball from the Veterans Day game back in 2020 with the Spring League. I am going to mail this to friend of the show, Brian Scott. I've already talked with him, the Spring League MVP of that season. Brian Scott is going to autograph this ball, and we are going to give it away on the podcast. So please like and subscribe. All you have to do to be entered is be subscribed to the podcast. We are at like 2,100 and change right now, trying to get to 2,500. I'll talk more about the ball and the rest of the items we have coming up at the end of the show, but that's just a tease. Hope you enjoy the episode. We'll check back in at the end. Thanks again. Well, here we have TSN insider, CFL insider, Dave Naylor back on the show. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. Good to join you again, Reed.
So my first question for you, how did the guitar, did you bring the guitar to the CFL on TSN? Like, or do you guys just go crazy, doing 6 hours in the studio and you're like trying to find something to do?
Yeah, we do get a little fidgety, especially on the doubleheader nights, in 6 hours. No, I am a very amateur guitar guy. Most of my progress in the guitar happened about more than 25 years ago when I was single and living in Saskatchewan. And, other than playing golf and covering football, I really didn't have much of a life there. So I played a lot of, guitar. And it's actually one of our guys in the studio that had the guitar. And both times he just kind of surprised me with it and said, here you go. You want to play something for the 3-minute break? So it was his idea. I tried to do a little better the second time than the first time. Don't know if there will be a third, but Milt was really crashing the party the last time by singing Karen Carpenter, which deeply offended me because Karen Carpenter is one of my favorite singers of all time, and Milt should not be trying to do Karen Carpenter. I'm better on the guitar than he is singing, so that's all I'll say.
So anyone that doesn't, Dave, it was the thrilling. Yeah, this was before the Nathan Rourke injury, but this thrilling game, BC Lions versus Saskatchewan, and they cut to break, and we have Dave Naylor sitting there playing guitar. He said, "I need to have Dave bring the guitar." So not a great week for the CFL, right? I mean, the Nathan Rourke thing, and I want to get your thoughts here in a little bit on USFL and XFL kind of stuff too.
Sure.
How big of a deal is the Nathan Rourke injury just to like the CFL as a league and everything right now?
It's massive. I can't think of a story where everybody climbed on board, and I mentioned this in something I did for SportsCenter this week, that the CFL fandom is a little different than some leagues. People tend to be big fans of the league as well as their teams. They want to see their team win, but they want to see their league thrive. And I think everybody recognized what Nathan Rourke represented. The fact that he was Canadian was kind of the headline of the story when the season started. But to be honest, that kind of faded away. He's just the best player in the league. It doesn't matter if he was born in Kazakhstan, right? It's like he's the best player in the Canadian Football League. And I think the excitement, there were 4 games every week, but you kind of circled the one that Nathan Rourke was playing in. And he reminded us what truly consistently elite quarterback play in this league looks like. And so I think all of those things, we're really kind of, and also taking the CFL conversation to places that maybe it didn't go. People noticing the league that didn't notice it before, and we're talking about him. And I know there's some people that were sensitive about, how much you talk about him in a possible future in the National Football League while he's in the CFL. I'm not one of those. And I actually believe that, I'll give you an example. A lot of people who don't watch college football but are big NFL fans, if they hear about a quarterback who's going to be in the NFL next year, they'll pay attention to when that guy is playing. But they're not going to watch college football on its own, but just for the sake of. I really think the same thing was happening and maybe would have continued to happen with Nathan Rourke through the fall, that people are like, hey, if this guy's going to, I'm not a CFL fan, but if this guy's going to be in the National Football League next year, I want to see him and learn about him. And, I think we're always a CFL community saying, how do we get people who don't watch our game to watch our game? And I think this was another opportunity for it. So I'm not, shy or awkward about the NFL conversation. I absolutely think he would have got a shot had the injury not happened. I think the question was what kind of shot. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if he has to play another season in the Canadian Football League for Nathan Rourke. Obviously, it's great for the league and the BC Lions, but even for Nathan Rourke, and I'm going to reference Warren Moon here, and Warren Moon has talked about the fact that he played 6 seasons in the CFL. He was able to walk from being the number 1 quarterback of the Edmonton then Eskimos to the number 1 quarterback of the Houston Oilers. He wasn't competing to get on the practice roster. He wasn't competing for a backup job. He walked through the door as the established number 1. Now, I don't know if Nathan Rourke will ever do that, but the longer he plays in Canada and the more success he has while he's still relatively young, the higher you can slot in down there. And I think there's, again, if he comes back and plays another, in those days, Warren Moon probably was making more money as the starting quarterback at Edmonton than he would have as a backup in the National Football League. That's probably the biggest reason why he didn't go earlier. But the nice sort of side effect of it was he was a fully finished sort of product by the time he left the Canadian Football League. So I don't think it's terrible. Nathan Rourke's 24. If he plays a season next year and at a level similar to what we've seen, and his health is good, I don't see any reason why that would interfere with his path. The question now is going to be, would somebody still sign him? And I think maybe they would, but there's going to be big concerns about that injury. I think there's legit concerns about never mind, is he coming back this year? Because the surgery isn't until Friday even, so they won't really know till they look at it. Is he going to be ready for training camp next year? I mean, that sounds like an outrageous thing to say when they're talking about coming back late. But in me talking to people in the medical community, not about his injury specifically, but about this type of injury generally, it can extend a lot further than, there's a pretty big range, and the long end of that range could be significant. So, I hope that if Nathan Rourke does go to the NFL, whether it's this offseason or next, that, he waits until he's getting a good opportunity, to at least compete to be a number 2, that he's not going to go down and think, well, I'm better off, being on an NFL practice roster than I am playing 18 games in Canada. And knowing what I know about him, I don't think he would think that, but I also know that a lot of people would look at it and say, just get a foot in the door. But, just for my own rooting interests and what I think might be best for him in the long term is, I hope he's playing in the CFL next season.
Yeah, I mean, not to throw any shade at our friend Matt Baker or anyone in BC, but when they're talking about like a late season return for Nathan Rourke, it's like I don't. He hasn't even undergone anything yet. I don't think that happening.
I mean, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a trainer, but I have I have a good friend who is a former head trainer of a major program in Division I, and I shot him an email the other day and said. I said, what did you think of the Nathan Rourke injury? And the first actually reply he sent me back was hilarious. He says, I think it shows us that we can't have nice things. Yeah. and I said, well, that wasn't what I meant. I meant from a medical perspective. And then he came back and said, look, if that's truly what they say it is, he's going to be a while.
It's the worst thing about football is it's just so unpredictable and anything can happen at any time and anyone can get hurt in any play. I mean, you see guys, Zach Wilson running non-contact, anything. Just it's horrible.
Reed, so often when a guy who's a former first or second rounder in the NFL shows up in the CFL, the first thing I'll do is go to his bio and guess what the first 2 or 3 years of his NFL career looked like? Injury, right? That's so much the part of the story. Guys were graded out to be, high NFL picks or mid-round NFL picks. Well, how do they end up in Canada so quickly? So often the story is just guys that can't stay healthy. It is the toughest part of this game and this business is the way injuries. And you could just feel the deflation even in our studio on the panel the other night when the camera shot went to Nathan Rourke going off and then sitting on the bench. It was just like, oh boy, our season just changed. Not our season, the BC Lions, our season, the CFL and TSN, because we've spent so much time, I think rightly so, talking about Nathan Rourke.
So the Michael O'Connor event, I mean, obviously, BC wants to, we're hyping up and it's not all, whoa, the world is collapsing. But I mean, how suitable of a replacement is he? I mean, obviously it's never going to replace Nathan Rourke.
Look, I'll be honest here. I was critical or skeptical of the decision to make Nathan Rourke the starter in BC at age 24 off of 2 starts in his career. I was obviously completely wrong. Okay. Like, I'm out there and just saying, whoa. And I had a great conversation with Rick Campbell during the Lions' first bye week, where he really walked me through, in detail, all of the things that went into that decision. And by the time I'd finished talking to Rick and I'd watched 2 or 3 games of Nathan, I no longer had doubts about that decision. But approaching the season, I very much did. The other part of that decision I questioned was the decision not to back him up with anybody who had much experience. And I know they signed Antonio Pipkin before training camp during training camp when he got released in Toronto. But I think part of why they weren't able to was they were very upfront with any quarterbacks they talked to in the offseason. It was not, you can come in and compete with Nathan. It was, you can come in and compete to be Nathan's backup. Like, he's our starter. So if you're coming here expecting to start games, this is not the place for you. So, give the Lions credit for saying that up front, because as you may know in this business, players don't always get the straight goods sometimes when a team's trying to sign them and get them to land with them. So, but the bottom line is it leaves them, woefully inexperienced at the backup quarterback position. And I'm not saying Michael O'Connor isn't good enough to play, but the body of his experience in the CFL is basically garbage time. Garbage time in games. I think he has a start at the end of the 2019 season, which was garbage time for the Toronto Argonauts, at that point of the year. So it's very, very difficult. And the thing that is going to stand out in a lot of people's minds is, hey, he was the number 2 in Calgary when when Bo Levi Mitchell went down last year, and Dave Dickenson leapfrogged the number 3 quarterback over top of him. And I remember a lot of people in Canada and media people who really want to cheer for the Canadian quarterback thing, and I get it, were horrified when he made that decision, right? Because it was like, hey, the American guy is going to play in front of the Canadian guy, even though he was 3rd on the depth chart. Well, when Jake Maier went out and threw for 300 yards, first CFL player in history to throw for 300 yards in 3 consecutive games to start his career, we all kind of went, okay, maybe Dave Dickenson knows something about quarterbacks, which we probably should have given him that benefit of the doubt before. I don't think nationalism or any of that matters to Dave, and it was the right choice. But it didn't really help us answer the question all of what Michael O'Connor is. And, I think one of the things was, beyond the skill set, there's that other aspect of playing quarterback. Do you have the intangibles? Can you lead in the huddle? Do players naturally follow you? All those kind of things. And I think those are things that are still yet to be proven. So it's a real nice story about 2 Canadian quarterbacks at 1 and 2. As Rick Campbell told me many times, that had nothing to do with our decision. But this guy was a high pedigree guy, right? Like, he was, he was Penn State, right? He was one of the top high school quarterbacks in North America when he came out of high school in Florida, where he finished. Grew up in Ottawa, finished in Florida, was a Penn State guy who I believe James Franklin came in at the end of his first year as the new head coach there. And that so often happens in college football. You didn't recruit the guy, you're going to recruit your own guys. And the guy who was there before you sort of feels like he's best to move on. But look, the other thing, and I'll just mention on this, is there is not a great history of quarterbacks being successful coming out of the U Sport level. We have one already in Trey Ford this year. Again, very, very unique athlete in the context of U Sport quarterbacks. Is athletically off the charts compared to anybody I've ever seen. He won his first start this year before he got hurt. But if we're sitting here talking about the history of U Sport quarterbacks and their success in the Canadian Football League over the last half century, it's going to be a pretty short conversation.
Speaking of, and obviously this will air, after the big Jake Maier start tonight, but with Calgary, but surprising. I mean, I guess not surprising because of how he played last year. We had him on in the offseason, but like Bo Levi, I mean, what do he posted that like his statement right online. Whatever. Yeah. I thought it was funny. Like Danny Austin retweeted it, and like Danny got I'm like the amount of interest in like even Danny retweeting Bo Levi's statement from Instagram, I just thought was crazy because he really is, one of the mainstay figures here in the CFL for years. But are we moving on from Bo Levi? I mean, what do you make of that?
The question for me about Bo Levi Mitchell is, how a guy has an injury and then he's recovered from the injury. But even when he's recovered from the injury, the accumulation of injuries mean he's not the same player. Best example we saw of that probably was Matt Nichols, right? Who went to Ottawa and showed up as the ghost of Matt Nichols, right? He couldn't couldn't throw the ball the way he could. And even though he had quote unquote recovered, I don't know if he was ever going to be able to throw the ball again the way he had, which is why he then retired, I guess. The question with Levi Mitchell is I think, has the accumulation of nicks and bruises and surgeries and injuries made him a different player by his early 30s than he was, in his late 20s? I was looking at some numbers for him, and it's interesting. He's been about a 66% completion percentage guy most of his career. This year, I believe he's at about 61, which isn't huge, but it's a little bit. And the one that really jumps out to me on him is the touchdown interception ratio. Throughout his career, he's been a minimum 2 touchdown interception guy. Like, I think 2019 he was a little less than that, but throughout his career, it's 2-1 or higher. Really, right from 2014 when he takes over. But last season and this season combined, he's 19 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. Like a 1-to-1 ratio, which is significantly different from where he was. And as I'm sure, a lot of quarterbacks feel when this happens to them, they're not individuals out there doing it by themselves. They're not tennis players, they're not golfers, they're quarterbacks. And that depends on the offensive line, and that depends on the guy running the right route, and that depends on your running back being good at pass protection, all those kinds of things. But I think what our guys were sort of pointing out the other day was that there was a bit of a kind of chucking it up quality to Levi Mitchell that we haven't really seen before, right? And he's more of a guy who hits people in stride, and there was just kind of that aspect to it. I think that the comparisons were made a lot between Levi Mitchell getting pulled and Cody Fajardo getting pulled. The difference in terms of the decision this week, I think, is before Mason Fine came into that game last week, he completed 13 passes in his CFL career. If you're going to sit your starter down for a guy who's completed 13 passes, that's a much bigger leap than it is sitting your starter down for a guy who looked really good in 3 starts a year ago. And, based on my conversations the last 24 hours, looked really, really good in training camp. Like I'm led to believe there was not a lot between Levi Mitchell and Jake Mayer in training camp this year. And obviously when it's close, the veteran, the guy who's proven himself is going to get the nod. But if you were just evaluating them blindly, and didn't know who was who, I'm led to believe there wasn't a lot to choose based on the way they performed at training camp.
Yeah, what the hell is going on in Saskatchewan? Like, what is? I mean, it's so funny. I've talked to Cody Fajardo all season. I've never seen a more polarizing figure that doesn't do. I mean, he's like the least polarizing, but everyone can't stop. But I said, Marty York is also on this episode too. I was talking with him earlier this week, and I said Cody's so weird because he gets pulled, and he should be named Cody Fine. Oh, it's fine. They pulled me. Okay, yep. I'll be back. Yep. I mean, what is going on?
Well, it's funny. He's polarizing, but it's like everybody who has that job is polarized. I remember talking to Darian Durant about this, and he was one of the most successful quarterbacks they had in their history. And I remember going to practice one day in Saskatchewan. He turned to me and said, do they ever support their quarterback in this market? Do they ever get it was something along that effect. Does this ever end? Kind of, that he was constantly being second guessed. And I think that's, in some ways, that's just a product of the fandom. But you have some dynamics here with Cody Fajardo, who, Chris Jones was right. Cody Fajardo coming out of college was not regarded as a great passer. That's why he was a number 3 on 2 CFL teams before he got to Saskatchewan. It was essentially a short yardage guy. And, I know the point Chris was making was to try to illustrate what Steve McAdoo had done with him in Saskatchewan. But his point being that was not Cody's reputation as a player when he came into the league, I think is correct. He became a much better passer than people expected. Nobody would have forecast him to be the Western nominee for outstanding player, at the start of a season that he wasn't even the number 1. And I remember talking to him a little bit about that and about that reputation of being a run first guy, because that's certainly what his college stats showed. But he was really showing that he could throw the football. A couple things happened this year in Saskatchewan. One, their offensive line play has not been as good as it's been in the past. That's been a big issue. And it's a standard across football, right? When your offensive line is not protecting you the way it has, the quarterback's not going to look as good. And then you have a receiver unit that's been decimated, right? That, Kyron Moore, as a kind of all over the field guy, Kyron Moore can do it all, right? He can catch the ball out of the flat and be a yards after catch guy. He can run routes. He can run deep routes. He can stretch the field. He can do everything. Every guy, he's one of the more sort of versatile receivers I can think of in the league. And And then, Shaq Evans, right, who for a while looked like he was becoming an elite receiver until the same thing that chased him out of the National Football League has hurt him in the CFL, and that's not being able to stay healthy. Right? He was a 4th-round pick, I think, of the Jets, right, who I don't think he ever played an NFL game. It was injuries that sent him here. It's pretty rare to see a guy drafted that high who never played a game. But again, it was injuries. Duke Williams has been okay for Duke Williams. I mean, he had a really poor game against BC the first time the Lions visited there, and like he's made his plays, but it hasn't been the best of Duke Williams. So you got to receive, and then I can't tell you why they don't get the ball to Keon Schaefer-Baker over the last month or so. It just seemed like just as he was developing into an elite guy, they haven't been able to get the ball to him. I don't know if defenses are taking him away or what's happening, but I think, and then I'll defer to my colleagues a little bit who point out that Cody isn't getting the zip on the football that even he used to get, right? And David Sanchez, who's sitting next to me on the panel, is pointing out how receivers are constantly coming back to the ball. And so you got a little less torque on the football, an offensive line that's not what it was, and a receiving unit that personnel-wise just hasn't been what it once was. And lately they haven't been able to run the football either. Earlier in the year, they were really able to run it a lot better, but Jamal Morrow, who's now hurt, his last couple of games haven't been anywhere near as productive. And that again puts more pressure back on Fajardo. So I think what Saskatchewan is facing is the West Division for quite a while now has been Calgary, Winnipeg, and Saskatchewan, right? That's the top tier of the West Division. And down at the bottom, there's Edmonton and BC. Well, BC has taken the elevator ride up to the top of the division, and somebody's got to go to make room for them. And it feels like it could be Saskatchewan, especially with the schedule that they face right now. Now, again, they're not going to face Rourke this week, so that's an opportunity for them. And I think their defense, which is, more solid than their offense, could really give Michael O'Connor trouble just based on his lack of experience and how aggressive that front seven can be. And then you've got and then you've got them back-to-back with Winnipeg, right? Which, Winnipeg's look beatable, but only one team's actually beat them. So you can see how there's a path to Saskatchewan to the bottom of the division or near the bottom of the division. And that, I think, is why everybody's on edge there. It's not, just the quarterback's play or this. It's looking at the schedule and saying, hold on a second, are we even a playoff team? If this doesn't go our way in the next month. And then it's about not the long term, it becomes about the short term. And when the decisions about player personnel are more about the short term than the long term, because you got to win football games, that's when you can see some things happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, here we were talking, is Saskatchewan, hosting the Grey Cup, and we're going to spend all this cap money, and now it's like they're not even, it's not even in the conversation.
No, and of course the last time they hosted it, they won it, right? And they that was the sort of perfect scenario for them. But there's going to be some intensity in that Labor Day game and the Banjo Bowl the following week, because I think the Roughriders may feel a little bit like they're playing for their season at that point.
Before I let you go, I want to get thoughts, because I could go down this rabbit hole of the Gary Stearns of it all and everything else, get your thoughts on all that. But, I want to get your thoughts, the other alternative football leagues we talk about, USFL, XFL, like USFL completed its season. I had you on, I think, before, anything had even happened, talk about that. Here we've seen a lot of players get signed to the NFL, a lot of players get released now, as window. What do you make of the USFL of it all, having completed its first season now going into year 2?
I'll be honest, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, and I got to also be honest, when I did find it on, the prospect of watching games in completely empty stadiums, I did not find compelling television. And it's just, it's part of the act, man. It's like, and we even say in the NFL, part of the reason their games look so compelling is because, the stadiums are full in every corner. I always talk about a TSN when I mentioned the Labor Day game and the Banjo Bowl. Those will be the two most compelling television visual games that we put on TV, because both stadiums have closed ends and every seat will be full. Right. So just as an entertainment product, you need fans. I don't think you can create a viable entertainment product with nobody in the stadium. Like they got 40 guys signed in the NFL, into camps, which I know most of them won't make it, but that certainly tells you that the quality of players in the league is decent. Doesn't mean that necessarily every position group is as strong, because we know the hardest thing to find for most football teams is offensive line and quarterback. So just because you got 40 guys signed in the NFL doesn't mean that you're creating that level of play. I don't know what to make of it. I know this thing evolved out of the spring league, and that's where they got the hub model. I'm, I guess, a much bigger believer in the XFL because of some of the people that are behind it, because of the affiliation with the National Football League. And, you know, they've obviously taken a much longer runway at this than the USFL did. All that said, the USFL is legitimate competition for the Canadian Football League when it comes to players. And I know teams that, you know, lost guys to the XFL or lost negotiations to the XFL this year. And, you know, when you throw to the USFL this year, when you throw the XFL on top of that, look, other than Nathan Rourke and Zach Caleros, it is not a stunning era of quarterback play in the CFL right now, even though we've got higher scoring games. You know, I would never look at the play in the league and say it's really crisp and really sharp and really elite right now. It's not. And then you've got the reality that the next 2 years at least of that next class of guys that are coming out of college that don't get to the National Football League or get cut in the National Football League, where do you think their first stop is going to be? It's going to be the XFL or the USFL, right? And the numbers are, you know, first of all, these are guys that are not looking for a second career in another league. These are guys that are looking to get to the NFL. 10 weeks versus 21 weeks. In the USA versus Canada. You know, about the same dollars for an entry-level player. And then, you know, obviously the ability to finish your schedule in the spring and walk right in football shape to an NFL camp, as opposed to finishing in November and having to go through an off season. So those leagues are set up to accommodate guys that are on that bubble. The CFL is not. CFL is not established as a development league. It is a standalone league. Those leagues are primarily development leagues, I would say, even the XFL, the way they're defining themselves. So I still don't know if people want to watch spring football. I don't know whether, like, look, I think after we went through the AAF, we all did a bit of a pause on trying to prejudge these leagues. Because when I was talking to people between that one, whether it was CFL GMs, they were worried about the AAF. Whether it was agents, the one they believed in was the AAF. And boom, it was gone in 6 weeks. So, yeah, I'm reserving my judgment on all of these things. But I think just the existence of these leagues represents, you know, a talent diversion for CFL teams, you know, with the most important players. And we may, if these leagues survive, I think eventually we may see guys coming to this league, you know, at 26, 27, 28 that used to come at 23, 24, 25. And when you talk about quarterbacks and the time to adjust to the game, and when we all talk about it takes 2 or 3 years of really practicing and being in the CFL system till you're able to run an offense at a you know, competent level, at a high level. So if you've got to wait 2 to 3 more years to have those guys show up, it's got it. You know, people here don't want to talk about it because, one, there's nothing you can do about it, and two, every single threat of the past has turned into a paper tiger. so that's actually 2 pretty good reasons not to spend too much time dwelling on it. And I'm sure there are CFL fans that every time I mention the XFL just say, "Why are you talking about that?" And so I get that, but in the short term, this is an obstacle to getting the next best players into the CFL.
And just to clarify, I think they topped out at 50 or 51 players signed to the NFL, the USFL.
It was at 51? USFL, so yeah. I saw it was 40 about 10 days ago or something. Yeah, that's a lot.
I just wanted, because I'm sure someone's angrily typing.
Someone's going to freak out. And yeah. I saw the meme that said 40 when they hit 40. I'm sure but that's a big number. I mean, what's the CFL in an average off season? About a dozen?
Yeah. Maybe
a dozen and a half in a good year. And, part of that is, half your league is Canadian. And, and I'm not, how do I say this without getting myself in trouble? Some of some of the Canadian players would be on the team regardless. A lot of the Canadian players are there because there's a ratio, right? And those guys are not going to be studied by NFL teams for opportunities. So, that's part of why the CFL is producing less talent for the NFL. Part of it is we have older players in our league. I often say the best players in this league aren't of any interest to the NFL because they're not 25, right? Like there have been all kinds of guys that played at a level that was good enough to play in the National Football League, but they were 32. So everybody in the USFL is young, right? So there are some factors that produce that 51 number compared to the 12 number in the CFL that aren't just apples to apples, right? There's some different dynamics. The league being set up to end in May, guys are in football shape, they're out of contracts, they can walk right into all those kind of things, lend itself. So I wouldn't look at that as a scoreboard like 51 to 12, but the fact that they put 51 guys into NFL camps, it can't be ignored either.
Yeah, and that'll be my last question. I'll let you go here. It is odd because, like you said, the CFL is set up. You're going to go make a career there. You're going to spend time there. You're going to live there. Be a part of the community. XFL, USFL, like you said, it is a show, and they're very open about that. We interviewed Coach Becht, the St. Louis coach, at the showcase here a couple weeks ago, and he said the biggest accomplishment for him would be if all of his guys got signed to NFL rosters and he had to start again. And you're like, okay, but I don't know the sustainability of that. I had people, comment on, the USFL, and they're like, hey, they're killing my team. I don't subscribe to this, but that's my Birmingham Stallions team, and now they're gone, and now I got to watch. You're losing that continuity, and so I don't know. I don't know what the sustainability is to two, all football spring leagues where there maybe isn't a lot of continuity every year because players are moving on to other things.
See, I think that's essential, and the CFL struggles with that to some degree because there are some guys that come up here wanting to get to the National Football League. They stay for a year or two. It doesn't happen. They retire. Right. That's what happens to some guys, and other guys come up here and kind of find they like it a lot more than they ever thought. And they're here for 12 years and they move their families here and they stay and they raise their kids out. And hopefully they have sons that become Canadians in the CFL in 25 years. Like we've seen, we really like this. American players, retiring in Canada, raising their families here with Canadian sons. We're big on this.
It's a long con. It's a long con.
It's playing the long game, man. But it's, but I think that's going to be that would be the challenge for those leagues because that's what NFL Europe was, right? Like basically 80 new players every year, wasn't it? Like pretty much. I think there was when the goal of your team is to have as many players on your team, not on your team next year. I don't know that that's really inviting to fans, right? Because what do fans want to do? They want to buy a jersey, right? They want to they got to know who the players are. They want to know their stories. They want to identify them. And I think sometimes this issue is overdone a bit because you look at college right now, right? With the 3 years and leaving, college turns over very, very quickly. And people somehow identify players with college and their stars and all that thing. So I don't think you need everybody playing 10 or 15 years, but I don't think you can turn over your most important players every single year and develop or sustain a fan base. And that's really one of the biggest things. And when people go back to, it's funny, I'm old enough that I actually can put in context what the original USFL was, right? And it's the only one of these leagues that wasn't about that, right? They were about building teams. They were about competing with players for the National Football League. Now, you blow your brains out financially doing that unless you had Saudi money or something these days, right? It's not really an economically viable model anymore because of how gargantuan the NFL and its revenue streams have become. But that to me is the two hurdles that these leagues have, I think, to survive are one, convincing people to watch football in the spring, which has still not really been done. And I like football as much as anybody. I watch as much football as anyone. And when the Super Bowl is over, I need a break. I'm not saying, I can't wait for the XFL next week. And again, your product is going to be compared to the NFL playoffs because of when you're playing. So it's, even optically, it doesn't work to your advantage. That's the biggest one. That's still unproven. And then the point that you make, that is that if these are development leagues and the goal is to, why don't people get totally obsessed with AAA baseball? Because the team's different every year. And the best players, the goal of the manager is to get the best player off the roster to the major leagues. And that's why, and I'll end on this. That's why every time, and God knows I get this a lot, you can imagine. I get a tweet from somebody saying, the CFL needs to become a farm league for the National Football League. And I'll always, I will not even give it shades of gray. I always write back, worst idea ever. Don't have enough characters to explain why. Stop it. Because when your team's goal is to develop players first and not win the Grey Cup, but before winning the Grey Cup, it's a different model. That's a totally different business. And I don't know how the XFL is going to walk those things because obviously you're not going to have players coming up in mid-season because of when their season is. So you can harness that group of players to say, hey, our goal is a championship. But when the mandate is that open, as you described it, saying, hey, our goal is to get as many of our players to the National Football League next season. I mean, CFL coaches, I'm sure if you asked them, would say, hey, we got a guy who's got that kind of talent. I hope he's able to, get an opportunity and take care of his family. But you'll never hear a CFL coach say at the start of the season, my goal is to get as many guys as possible into another league. It's just not part of the identity of the league.
Well, Dave, I could talk to you all day. I gotta let you go. I gotta hop on here another interview. Thank you so much for your time. I have flights booked for Regina, so we will, we'll be there again. Hopefully, we can do our COVID test next to each other again, like last time. So,
well, you truly read my mind, Reed, because before you got off here, I was going to say, tell me your flights are booked for Regina, because this is an experience. I know you've been to one Grey Cup now, right? And it was a scaled down version. Hamilton's a good CFL town. But there's nothing quite like Regina in November in a Grey Cup year.
I think very conceivably I will be hopefully in Dallas covering the XFL draft and then hopping on the flight the next day to get to Regina. So it could be a very packed week for me. But yeah,
wow.
No, flights are booked. We're going through Vancouver and then Calgary on the way back or something. But yeah, we're there. So
awesome. Bring your warm coat.
I will. Awesome. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks. Take care, Reed.
Well, this is exciting today. We have Jake Russell with the Washington Post talking alt football. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
We're good. We're getting now. XFL is back in the news. It's been a long slog of the last. This is year 3 of me doing this podcast. Have you never had an XFL game to actually podcast about? So
that's pretty work.
It is. So, obviously you had the story come out, XFL, we finally announced all the cities and all that stuff. I always, initial thoughts just in terms of alt football, spring football in general, we talk USFL here in a little bit too. What are your thoughts on the non-NFL football leagues?
So growing up a diehard football fan, I never really had that much access to alternative football leagues as a little kid. I don't think the CFL was televised. I was well aware of the CFL, but if it was televised, I wasn't really aware of what stations it was on because they had the Baltimore Stallions when I was a kid, but I didn't really watch it then. And then the Vince McMahon brought along XFL 1.0 when I was 12 years old, something like that. And then that was like the peak of my NFL, WWF, then now WWE fandom. So when you combine like the best of both worlds, it was like I'm watching every single week. I'm watching every single game. So I was hooked with that league back then. I was really disappointed when it only lasted 1 year. I mean, even back then I still have the XFL preview magazines. There was 2 of them that came out in the grocery store, and I still have those to this day. So the little chances that I did get to have a spring alternative, I would watch it. I'll even watch the Arena Football League when it was at its peak, when it was on NBC every weekend. You would see stars like Damian Harrell playing for the Colorado, I think they were called the Rush. That may have been Chicago, actually. I forgot may have been Colorado Crush, tomato. But either way, I tried to watch as much of that as I could because, growing up an NFL fan and loving the sport and loving the game, there's no such thing as too much football for me. If the great thing about it is if you have an alternative to watch in the spring and you feel overwhelmed with football, turn it off. Go do something. Go for a walk. Go for a run. Go do something healthy. Go do something with your family, your friends. But if you want football, it's there for you. So I just don't understand why people complain about spring football. Like, if you don't like it, don't watch it. I just don't understand the negativity towards it. I mean, that's just the same thing with pretty much every other sports alternative out there. If you don't like it, don't watch it. And then the results will show in terms of ratings and viewer interest. But for me, I'm ready for the third iteration of the XFL to come back. I was disappointed when the second one went bye-bye because of the coronavirus pandemic, because I thought that one had a good chance to stick around based on, the financial investment put into it, the television marketing that they had, the TV rights that they had back then, and basically taking itself a little more seriously as opposed to come out and run a promo, even though The Rock was my guy back then as a kid. I don't know if that would really fly today if you want to be taken seriously as a football league, having him call, the opposing team a Rudy Poo, whatever. But I thought with the rules innovations, the camera angles, the different technologies they were trying, I thought they were doing really well, even though, as expected, the TV viewership went down from week 1 to week 5. That was kind of to be expected with kind of any startup league, because initially people want to see what's new. They want to see what innovations are going on. They want to see how they're, enacted. And of course, naturally, as time goes on, they'll decide whether they want to watch it or not. And typically, viewership goes down. So that's kind of expected. I'm sure, this time around, The Rock and Danny Garcia and Jerry Cardinal are well aware of that. They're prepared financially for X amount of years. I believe it's a 3-year deal with the TV deals they have. So I'm pretty sure they're prepared for that. They just want something that's sustainable, that can last over years, and they want to build fan engagement in person to start.
I'm curious what the XFL this season is going to look like. Like you said, a lot of people watch, especially the 2.0 for the rules innovations and all that stuff. We were down when they announced the Arlington hub and all that a couple weeks ago, talking, Russ Brandon, right, who's the president. And I don't know if I'm worried, but I'm curious how much of an NFL influence is going to be on it in terms of like, we want this to look like the NFL. We have players, right, that we want to get into the NFL. A lot of people I talked to about the USFL during the season thought it wasn't different enough, right? Like it was the NFL, just not as good because, their words, not mine, but, so I'm curious, like if that is what people loved about XFL 2.0, if that's not there this go around, I'll just be curious to see what people's reactions are when the rule book comes out.
Yeah, me too. I think obviously they've done a lot of work, I'd have to imagine, over the last couple of years, looking at every single game, what worked, what didn't work. And I would imagine, I'm just guessing here, you would think they would have to keep that kickoff rule that they had last time. I thought that was one of the better innovations that they had, with everybody waiting until the returner catches the ball before they can actually start running. I thought that was a great idea. It was unique. It was different. And the combination of that and player safety, and it also encourages kickoff returns, which the NFL is basically trying to, relegate from the sport, which is disappointing. I mean, at this point in the NFL, it's like, why even have kick returners if you're not going to have kickoff returns, if everybody's just sticking their arms out to the side to say, I'm not touching the ball because it's 10 feet over my head and going out the end zone. That's not fun. So I think that with the XFL, that was a combination of, fun, action, and safety at the same time in terms of, how fast the players are going to be at the time of collision. That helps the players and the fans, I think, simultaneously. So I think with the new iteration, with the new leadership group, I think they're going to take a look at everything. And I feel like even though they have that partnership with the NFL Alumni Association, I feel like they're still going to... It's smart for them to want to be kind of a feeder league to the NFL. That would help ensure business. That would, ensure stability, ensure a nice, healthy working partnership with the NFL. But I feel like they're separate enough from the NFL that they have the wiggle room to try out different things, to try out different rules like they did last time around. And I think that's kind of what the NFL would want too. I don't think the NFL wants to try out necessarily, not too often. I don't think they want to try out too many new rules on their own without having seen how it works first. And I think the XFL would be a good ground for that, for the NFL to see, okay, if this works, we might implement these rule changes, might implement these roster rules, et cetera, et cetera. So I think with what they're doing right now, I think it's going to be a fine balance. I don't think it's going to be too NFL-fied, and I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to XFL 1.0. I think it's just going to be a continuation of XFL 2.0 with, a better polished learning curve from last time. I think it's going to be a more polished product than last time, even though it was pretty solid compared to XFL 1.0.
I just, curious, and I just got done with our other interview with Dave Naylor talking like, when the USFL is champion, we got 50 guys onto NFL rosters, right? Like that's their boasting point, which is great. I mean, obviously, like and whether those guys, latch on, as cuts go down, but, where your goal is pushing these guys on, the continuity coming back to next year. Like, I just don't know if that should be a concern. If your number one goal is getting guys, onto the next show and not worried about, building your own league. I don't know. Do you worry about that turnover and them that is their selling point moving forward?
I think there has to be a balance between, okay, part of our role as, not necessarily a minor league, football league, but, something that will never match the NFL, at least in our lifetimes. We have to balance the idea of, we want our players to advance. That's the whole point. That is one of our biggest attractions, is having players come into our league for the shot to play in the NFL. I don't think anyone grows up and dreams of playing in the XFL or the USFL. No offense to those leagues. They all grow up dreaming of playing in the NFL. That's the peak. That's the ultimate sport in the world, not just America. So I think there's a balance there with, that's part of our attraction, is these players coming on here. And, we just accept right away that it's going to advance. I think part of the problem is they haven't had 2 years in a row to show what it would look like there hasn't been really a league that big since the USFL going 3 years in a row, I believe, with the chance to show that, we have top players who can become stars in the NFL. And they're balancing that with, we need to have a sustainable business model that'll stick around long enough that we can have this platform for these players. The XFL, the people in charge are well aware that they're not competing with the NFL. I mean, just take the simple fact alone that the XFL was bought for $15 million and the NFL is worth, I believe, $10 billion, something like that. It's worth, I could be way wrong, but the NFL is worth way more than $10 billion, actually.
The Cowboys, they said this week, the Cowboys alone.
$8 billion, that's right. Yeah, so I'm probably thinking pre this week. NFL is worth a lot more than $15 million. So the XFL is well aware of that. They just want to, I think right now they're worrying about themselves and how are they sustainable? How do they attract fans? How do they stay in business to give these players a chance to move to the NFL? And I think that's the balancing act they're well aware of when they bought the team or bought the league. And that's, I think it's a smart process going forward.
Obviously, XFL returning to DC was known, wasn't public. We had been reporting that Mike Mitchell for months that, some of the teams were returning, some of the new markets. Thoughts on the XFL, returning to DC, and we were there for the kickoff at Audi Field and all that stuff. But, just in terms of like Washington, DC is one of the 8 cities that were chosen for the XFL's return.
I thought it was a smart move on their part based on the fan engagement that they had back in 2020, because back then, it's crazy to think how much has changed in the football world in DC just since then, even outside the XFL. So a lot has changed since then. But even back then, fans were clamoring for an alternative because back then, the then Redskins were, they just had one of the worst seasons in a long time. They, were second overall pick in the draft coming that April. They eventually selected Chase Young. So the fans were upset, with, having Bruce Allen, even though he was just fired, they were upset with, having him been around for so long, and upset with Dan Snyder even before the Washington Post expose came out that summer of 2020. So they just wanted something new and fresh, and the XFL provided that for them. And it, when I was there, I covered the 3 home games, and just being there, you would see fans of all stripes there wearing all jerseys from around the NFL. And even like NHL jerseys and baseball jerseys and basketball. I'm like, they just want to come here to have a fun time. They don't even care about necessarily which team they're playing. And I believe the XFL gave them a product they were happy with. And the fact that the Defenders were 3-0 at home did not hurt either, as opposed, they had as many wins in 5 weeks as the Redskins had in 16 games of previous seasons. So that gave fans a taste of what, an alternative, happy football lifestyle would be for them, as evidenced by the beer snake. I don't think you'd see the beer snake at FedEx Field anytime soon. Especially I think they mainly sell them in cans too, so you can't really stack cans. You can only do that with cups. But with fans, they were really excited with the product. They were engaged the whole time from start to finish. The safety Raheem Moore even commented about, about how he'd never seen anything like that, even though he'd played in the NFL. He said, I don't know if these fans are being paid to be here or what, but they brought the energy. So, the players noticed it, and the fans, also back to the point about the fans wearing jerseys of all stripes, it's just, that's also a testament to how bad things had been with the NFL franchise in DC too, and how this generation of fan is not gravitating towards them. They're gravitating towards, I guess it's nationwide too. They're gravitating towards individual players and fantasy teams and stuff like that. There's less of a desire to grow up rooting for your hometown team or your local team now, which is a foreign concept to me. I guess I'm 34, but I'm like an 84-year-old type of 34. So I'm like used to that mindset. It's always strange to me when I see people walking around the area wearing like Cowboy stuff or Kansas City Chiefs stuff. I'm like, have you guys even been to those cities? But that's what the XFL did. They brought together those types of fans, and they eventually all became DC Defenders fans, and having a fun, exciting, and winning product, it kept everybody engaged. And I think that's what the XFL saw when they were reviewing the cities that they had before and where they could move to next. They said, even though it's a smaller stadium, they filled it up. It's not like they had, with the New York Guardians playing in MetLife Stadium and it looked like 1% filled. I feel like if the New York Guardians had actually played in like Red Bull Stadium or something like that, they would have probably been much better off. But for the Defenders, they averaged about 16,000 fans a game, and 15,000 plus one game, 16,000 plus another, and I think 17,000 plus the first game. And, filling out that much of a 20,000 seat stadium, I think is really strong numbers. And I think, with the league coming back, they have a chance to probably maybe sell out a game or two, possibly, maybe even hit shoot for the stars, aim for 18,000 and beat the previous attendance record they had last time around. But I feel like the XFL saw what they had with the DC fan base and the excitement that they had, and they said, this is a smart idea to bring it back to the District of Columbia.
Speaking of people of fans that don't live in, I am a Washington Commanders fan. I live in Seattle, and I am very horrified we don't need to go down the
details on that. How does that work?
So I kind of
you're the kid like I live in Washington, so I have to root for the
no, I've been the Seahawks fan for a long time. I covered them when I was in news when they went to the Super Bowl and all that stuff. But I've kind of fallen out of love with the Seahawks. We had Taylor Heineke, obviously, go from the Battlehawks to the XFL or to the Commanders. That's when I kind of made the leap, was when Heineke made the leap into the end zone and all that. That I did. I rode through him last year. Now I have all my Commander stuff. I have my Letterman jacket. I'm all in. I'm all in for this season, but I'm not as confident as Riverboat Ron here with how Wentz is going to do.
Yeah, you had to have been excited when they signed Jordan Ta'amu for a few days last year as a practice quarterback.
Well, they even signed Cole Boozer that was from the Guardians for like 10 minutes, and then he retired. And I don't know quite the backstory with that, but he's a friend of the show, Cole Boozer. So we have
nice.
The Booze.
Small world.
But speaking of fans, stands, DC, all that stuff, we talked before I hit record, USFL and all that. Curious your thoughts on that. I know you had articles about that. You covering the championship game and all that. Thoughts on the two competing alt football spring, flavors that we have right now.
Well, correction, I did not cover the game. I just watched it while I was working. But I did actually partake in watching that. My thought with the USFL was, I was engaged in like the first couple weeks, but as soon as, non-Birmingham Stallions games were played, you just saw the lack of interest on television, with maybe 500, maybe 1,000 people at most there for those kinds of games. And I just thought that's just not very smart. I know they're doing it to save money and that's their company line, but it's not a good look. And then them playing fake crowd noise during those games, I'm like, I know there's people there not making that much noise. I know that for a fact. And just watching that, it just was not as interesting and entertaining. And I'm of the mindset, I'm like, if you're trying to build a fan base in, X amount of markets, you should be playing and marketing in those markets so those fans can be up close and personal with those players and the team and the coach and get to know them and actually build some sort of rapport and, a willingness to want to buy tickets and go to games. I mean, I know they had their reasons behind keeping it all in Birmingham in the regular season and, Canton in the playoffs. But for me, I don't know if they did that to save money because they were also simultaneously trying to rushing out to beat the XFL by a year. That kind of was in the back of my mind too. When I watched them, like this, just even though the product itself wasn't too bad, I felt like it was, from the higher ups, it was kind of rushed just simply because I may be wrong on that, but that's just my observation from, outside looking in. I didn't cover the league. I just watched it from afar. That seemed to be my observation. They were just trying to get it in, a year ahead of the XFL and not take their time and roll it out, properly. I mean, they did a lot of things right. I think they did a decent job with uniform rollouts and stuff like that. But just watching it, I was less engaged with watching that product and knowing the XFL is around the corner too. But I feel like, if you're in the business of, having teams in select cities, if you have a city name before the team nickname, you should probably play the games in those cities. And even though the XFL isn't completely operating the way I would hope they would with, having the teams practice in Arlington all year round, I don't know how great of an idea that is. I don't know how much fan engagement you're going to get that way with, players not being in town during the week. But at least at a minimum, they're actually flying out and playing the games in the home locations of those teams. So I think that's very smart for them to do that at a minimum. Maybe next year, once they have a little bit of a base underneath them, then they can start practicing in the home locations and establish a practice facility for every team individually, as opposed to two teams playing in one location or practicing in one location like they're doing now. But for now, I think the XFL, even though it hasn't kicked off yet, I think it has the USFL beat in terms of marketing. It also helps to have one of the most popular actors in the world owning the league too and spreading the word almost every week, and giving fans updates on what's happening in the league. I don't know how long the USFL is for the football world, but I'm not rooting for their demise. I hope they stick around and I hope they do well, but I just don't see them, how they're set up right now, surpassing the XFL in in popularity and I guess getting the news out. I mean, obviously the TV deal that XFL has with ESPN is a major benefit. You're not really going to see too many USFL highlights, I'd imagine, on ESPN anymore, especially since they have that deal with the XFL. So I think the XFL has a leg up on them right now.
It's just interesting, even because this week, there was the USFL lawsuit, right, where the guys that owned the original marks back in the 80s, they were suing the new USFL. That just all was resolved this week. They settled privately. And so, one would presume USFL now is going to be able to say, like, hey, these are players from the great old days, whatever, because originally they started out with Doug Flutie, and then they couldn't do that anymore because of the lawsuit. So even that, like them settling everything this week, I think hopefully season 2 of the USFL is going to look and feel much different. And like you said, it goes back to, like you said, this rushing, like, let's get all these affairs in order and then move forward versus. But I guess now you have would you have a rickety proof of concept, though, that you have, like, this is a viable thing? I see both sides, but I definitely, like, there's the benefits of them having something now that they can show. Even if it is kind of a crude drawing on the back of a napkin, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I think with, it would have been ideal for them if they could have the old USFL stars to market this past season throughout the whole season. That would have helped brought back some nostalgic eyeball, I would imagine, for fans. Oh, Doug Flutie's here. Oh, Jim Kelly's promoting this league as well, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like that would have helped them out quite a bit. But with, like you said, I can kind of understand them wanting to get ahead of the XFL, because that just sounds like they are anticipating a strong push by the XFL the next year. So they would need to get as much of a headwind in front of them as possible to start the league. But I feel like they're a little bit, it's a little too late to get a full grasp on the USFL now with, having teams playing. And I feel like I read somewhere that they're going to have like 2 or 4 cities or something like that next year that they're going to play in. But that's still not good enough, in my opinion. No matter where they play, I don't feel like you're going to get too many Philadelphia Stars fans driving out to Detroit to watch the Stars play. I just don't see that really happening. Like I said, I feel like the XFL has them beat, and that's just my observation, just my opinion. It's not a bias or anything. It's just what I've observed in the business models and in terms of ownership and marketing and promotion, and how well known the ownership group of the XFL is, and their ability to put promotion and word of mouth behind it. I feel like the XFL already has a big lead, even though they haven't played a game yet, and they're still 6 months away. I still feel like they got a good lead on the USFL right now.
So now that we've announced the cities, right? I mean, they officially announced, we're working to get social media people hired, people in the local markets hired, right? Like they're going to have like team, I can't remember what the official, like, it's not team presidents like it was before, but they want like directors of marketing in each of the cities or whatever. Like, we're 2 weeks away, NFL kickoff. I'm already scheduling interviews and people saying like, oh, I can't talk XFL anymore, right? Because the NFL is starting, right? Because some of these sports reporters, I mean, I'm sure you as well. Like, is there enough time here to get like, we re-announce the Guardians or whatever the heck they're called? They probably can't be the Guardians anymore because of Cleveland, but like, we re-announce the DC team. The midst of all the NFL is going on for the next 6 months, and then we kick off in February. Like, are you worried about the timeline here of when we're getting these things rolled out?
Sort of, but I feel like that's a scenario where they can do something like midweek, maybe like a Tuesday or Wednesday when there's less NFL news going on. Maybe a Wednesday, because the Tuesday is the day after Monday Night Football and people will be talking about Monday night games. And Wednesday is a day that typically, I don't know how many people are previewing a Thursday Night Football game on a Wednesday. They probably wait till Thursday to preview Thursday Night Football games. So maybe something like that would work for them. They still got a lot to announce. They've got, coaches, a full coaching staff for every team to announce. And I still believe they haven't even announced the Las Vegas stadium yet, which is a little surprising to me because I feel like they didn't have a full coaching staff announced either besides the head coach initially. And now they don't even still don't have a stadium officially announced. So I feel like they're a little bit behind the ball. They still got that. They got the names, the logos, the uniforms to roll out. And then they have the draft in November, I believe. So they got a lot of stuff going on, but I feel like they're well aware of obviously, of all people, Dwayne Johnson knows the NFL schedule and is aware of the monstrosity that is NFL coverage during the late summer and fall and early winter. So I feel like they're well aware of that, and they're going to pace themselves. I feel like I believe the full coaching staff announcements will be coming up before those other announcements. So I'm waiting to see what the full DC XFL staff will look like. I still haven't gotten over the fact that Greg Williams is their defensive coordinator. That's still amazing to me that he's coming back to DC as the DC of the DC Defenders or whatever they're going to be called. I don't know what they're going to be called this time around. But yeah, I'm going to be very interested, even though I feel like I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can pay attention to the NFL and my fantasy team and, pay attention to what the XFL news is coming out and compartmentalize and say, okay, this is going on and I'll pay attention to this as well. So I feel like I can do a good job of paying attention to that. And I feel like diehard XFL fans have the ability to do the same too. They can watch the NFL and pay attention to off-season XFL news at the same time.
I just worry. I worry about getting the casuals in there. I mean, we're like, I think sometimes, like my Twitter and even with the USFL and like, it was the biggest story in the world last year. Okay, the USFL and like who's starting this week. It's like, I don't know what casual interest that the USFL was hitting. Above a certain level of like, we're following this every week on Twitter.
Yeah, it's like pretty much every fan base, whatever the story is, even in the NFL or any sports team, whatever the biggest news happening is with that team, pretty much no one outside that market really cares that much about it. So sometimes, it's everyone's guilty of it. You forget what kind of bubble you're in and, how, I guess, niche the inner workings, the inner group of people who actually pay attention to this stuff day in and day out is. It's not as vast as you would think. So like you said, it is important for the XFL to reach out to people who aren't paying attention to the day in and day out, the news of whatever's going on in the league. And that's the role of people smarter than me for them to figure out, because I'm not really too worried about trying to find out how you get the niche fan or the outside looking in type of fan, the casual fan, I should have said. How do you get the casual fan? And that's for them to figure out, not me. But I'm going to be curious to see how they do it, though. That'll be interesting to watch going forward.
Jake, I really appreciate your time. It's it's exciting and moving forward with announcements, everything else. We'll keep up to date with everything happening and hopefully get you back on. Really appreciate your time with the Washington Post and sharing your thoughts today.
All right, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Go Guardians or no, was it the Guardian? Was the I'm totally screwed up. DC Defenders. I'm going to get
baseball / New York football.
Now I'm going to get all my negative comments on there. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Well, I'm excited today in my quest to continue to discover, CFL talent to come on and chat. This gentleman has popped up a lot on Twitter, Marty York, and Marty and I connected last week. I said, I want to get you on to talk about, things happening in the world of the CFL today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, Reed. It's a pleasure to be on the Markcast.
So Marty, formerly one of the original members of the TSN panel, right? Many years ago, covering the CFL for a long time. How are you doing now? At current time, what are you up to?
I am the Director of Communications for B'nai B'rith Canada. It's an extremely gratifying work. Yeah, I'm now in almost my 8th year in the role, and we're keeping very busy with all the current events, but it's a far cry from my football days, that's for sure. Those started, believe it or not, I was just a tot, but those started when I was in 1979 with the Globe and Mail, which you may not know being in Seattle, but I think you do know because you're on top of it, is Canada's national newspaper. And then, I went from the Globe to TSN and then Sportsnet, and have never stopped following the CFL. In fact, I still talk to CFL people all the time.
Well, it's good. Yeah, we're covering this, from Seattle. Always appreciate getting, other smart people. I always am looking for smart people that can talk about anything, especially
Well,
sports.
then why'd you contact me?
So that's good. So, I want to get your thoughts on kind of, current stuff nowadays. Obviously, I have my, my BC Lions hat on. They're our team. I call them America's CFL team because, we're the American podcast. Big win on Friday for us, certainly came at a cost. What did you make of the Nathan Rourke injury and how big of a deal that is for the landscape of the CFL this season?
Well, unfortunately, it's a huge deal. And really, I thought we would be talking about Nathan Rourke in a completely different vein. He exceeded, I think, just about anybody's expectations by coming out right from the start. And he was dynamic. He was outstanding. He was the prototypical CFL quarterback in terms of being able to gun the ball, rifle it like a Dieter Brock did, and run the ball extremely well. He's a legitimate dual threat. I think it's really sad that he now has this ankle injury for the league in general, not only for the Lions. This is a guy who people were talking about. People were excited about the CFL. I don't want to say again, but even in Eastern Canada, because this Canadian kid, Reed, was excelling and he was dominating. He was shredding defenses. So all of a sudden he's out now, and it just puts a little bit of a damper on the league. I mean, I don't think there was any question he was en route to becoming the most outstanding player. I know he's a brave kid, and he was saying that he hopes he'll be back this year. But some of my sources tell me it's highly doubtful to recover that quickly from the sort of ankle injury, foot injury, and the surgery that he had. So it's all going to be up to Mr. O'Connor now. And we'll see. Another Canadian quarterback. We'll see if he can fill the shoes of Nathan Rourke. And I just hope, for the sake of the league and for his own sake, I hope that Nathan Rourke has a speedy recovery and comes back with the same scintillating performances that he had this year.
Yeah, I was trying to explain that, I film weddings in my, when I'm not doing all this stuff. And I, talking with people over the weekend and explaining this injury because the news came down on Sunday, that he was going to have the surgery and all that. And like you said, trying to explain just like for the league in general, like obviously it's horrendous for Nathan and the team and everyone there and his family and friends, but just the CFL in general, it really was kind of the guiding story of the season. And I just think that's what's, everything is depressing and everything's bad about it, but that's what upsets me too.
It really was. It was the story of the season. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself now, but it was definitely the story. And the way he blended with his receivers was something else. You don't usually see that from a first-year starter in any professional league, especially in the CFL, where, he's coming from U.S. college football and, there's the extra man on defense and that sort of thing. But he took advantage of having guys like Rhymes and Burnham. And this is the BC Lions are a very good team. Will they be as good without Rourke? I don't know, but we're going to find out, aren't we, soon?
What do you make of Michael O'Connor? I mean, he, obviously has been around for a little while, brought him in, like you said, the second Canadian. That was really cool to have that parity there across. But thoughts on him? I mean, it's obviously huge shoes to fill.
So, Reed, the thing about O'Connor is you've heard a lot of positive reports about him. The word is that he has a lot of promise. He has a lot of ability. It wasn't like he was some nobody at the college level. He accomplished quite a lot, but he's a different kind of quarterback than Rourke. I don't think he has the speed. I don't think he has quite the same gun as Rourke does, but I do hear he's a very good passer. I saw little bits of him with other teams in the CFL in the past. I saw him with the Argos a little bit. And, this will be his first real test as a starter, I think. And it'll be very interesting to see if he can carry on what Rourke started.
I saw a lot of, our Twitter followers, listeners saying like, oh, BC's got to trade or go out or what's still out there, who's available, right? Like we saw the Cody Fajardo stuff with the Roughriders last week and Levi Mitchell, and we got, Nick Arbuckle, what's going on. But I don't think there's any other like better alternative. I mean, we just ride with O'Connor, right? If you're the BC Lions.
I agree with you 100%, Reed. I mean, there is a conspicuous dearth of experienced quarterbacking within the CFL right now. I don't mind Schultz with Hamilton. He has his detractors. Evans doesn't seem to be picking up where he left off in Hamilton. The other Evans in Ottawa doesn't seem to be the answer, although he's a great runner. We'll see if he can maybe become a running back. I don't know. But Arbuckle has not succeeded anywhere except for those brief spurts he had in Calgary. And there is Zach Collaros, who's great, but the backup is somebody we haven't all heard of. And there's just a shortage of very good quarterbacks right now. Adams is hurt in Montreal, and there's all kinds of controversy about Bethel Thompson in the Toronto area. Some people don't think he's good enough to lead the Argonauts anywhere. I happen to think he's a very good passer, but he certainly lacks in that other area of running, and that is so vital in the CFL. So, yeah, you're just back to your point, Reed. I think you're right. There really aren't many better alternatives in the league right now than O'Connor. Maybe if Strevler gets cut by the Jets, and I don't think that's going to happen after his performance last night. But if he gets cut by the Jets, I could see a free for all in the CFL, a bidding war for him, because he certainly has a lot of ability, and I think he'd be a welcome addition back to the league.
It's odd for us, obviously we're newer to covering the CFL, right? And we got into this with the XFL, the whole long story I bore you about, but covering this now, and it does seem like sometimes, Mazzoli's kind of whatever, Evans is kind of whatever, Arbuckle's kind of whatever. And then it's like, okay, we're going to move them around to another team. And then like, maybe they're going to be better now. And it doesn't ever seem like, Mazzoli was doing good before he got hurt. He was probably the better, looking than certainly Dane Evans was, but it wasn't like Ottawa was lighting the world on fire before he got hurt,
No, I've always liked Mazzoli. I liked him in college, out your way, kind of out west. He was again one of those dual threats, and I think that's really important in the CFL with the wider field, etc., and only 3 downs. But I thought Mazzoli was okay. The way that I think Ottawa would be better right now if Mazzoli stayed healthy. The way he got injured was absolutely despicable. One of the worst things I've seen in all my decades of following sports. And I didn't see enough remorse from Marino either. So that was something that really bothered me.
Well, also, and then, he played obviously on Friday against the Lions, and his first play out I saw that got posted on Twitter went pretty viral. Him diving headfirst into Lucky Whitehead's return. This is your first play back on the field after the longest suspension in CFL history. Yeah,
and I don't know Marino very well. I don't even know his background very well. I've known him, since he's become a news item. And I've looked into his past performances a little bit. The fact that he had no remorse tells me the kind of guy he was. I do know Mazzoli a little bit, and I do have a lot of respect for him. And when Mazzoli came out and complained the way he did, and then added that there were racial comments made by Marino, I don't know if that's true. You don't know if that's true, but I can't see why Mazzoli would make that up. And other Red Black players, Nate Bahar for one, came right out and said they heard it or that this guy's comments were ridiculous. I would have liked to have seen a longer suspension for Marino based on what he did and what he allegedly said combined. Those two things bother me a lot. And you're right. He did go after Lucky Whitehead right away. I don't know if somebody said something to him because that was right at the outset of the game. And then after that, I didn't see him being nearly as rambunctious, let's say.
I want to ask you a couple more nuts and bolts, and then we'll talk some big picture stuff here. You mentioned McLeod Bethel-Thompson before. We're friends, fans of his on the show. We called him the king of the CFL last season. Everyone laughed at us.
Oh, yeah.
But the Argonauts are not good right now. They're struggling. I don't know if it's because of McLeod or in spite of McLeod or whatever. Like what Mike Mitchell, he has been on the show, covers the Argonauts. For us here in the States, like lots been made. Like, is it Dinwiddie? Is it Argos? Trying, every year we're trying to build a team and you can't build a roster overnight. Like, what do you think the Argonauts' biggest struggles are?
Well, if you listen to the critics in the Toronto area who care about the CFL and who care about the Argos, you will hear a lot of criticisms aimed at both Dinwiddie and Bethel-Thompson. I mean, like you said before, there's a shortage of quality quarterbacks around. You're not going to find people that quickly to replace Bethel-Thompson, and I don't think he's that bad. I really don't. I think he's got a good arm. I think he's a good passer. It's his running ability that is questionable, but that's what he has running backs for too, I guess. So, I think sometimes he gets stuck in the pocket and. If he could move around a little bit more, buy himself some extra time, he's got a good core of receivers. They're pretty sure-handed for the most part. I think Gittins is outstanding. And so I would absolutely like to see him move a little bit more. If he is, because I have seen him, once in a while he'll dart out of the pocket and he'll scramble for some yardage. If he could do that a little bit more, much the way Edmonton has instructed Cornelius to just get out of the pocket and run for his life. And he seems to have improved because of that.
It's just, Argonauts, I don't know if we're getting ready for Chad Kelly season here. The interesting with Chad, I think we had the USFL here back in April. That was our, the non-XFL, the other one. And, Chad Kelly, Uncle Jim Kelly, famous in the USFL. And I know that USFL had, reached out, tried to make an effort to get Chad to come. We always thought it was interesting. Like, man, you would take a backup role, or wasn't even presumed a backup role yet with the Argonauts, as opposed to taking what would be presumed to be, a starting position, a franchise, with the USFL here, right? Be the face of the league. So interesting. He went to Toronto, but it could be panning out for him now if McLeod kind of craps the bed.
Yeah, I think that, I think you're right, Reed. I think, a lot of people are calling for Chad Kelly to maybe replace Bethel-Thompson. I wouldn't do it myself yet, although he's done a lot of second and short kinds of plays, even third and short kinds of plays, and he's been somewhat successful at that. His uncle, by the way, is one of my favorite people. I knew him quite well, and even when he was in the USFL, because when he was playing for the Houston Gamblers, his coach was Mouse Davis. Who he also had in college in Portland. And Mouse Davis was the Argos offensive coordinator way back in the early 80s. And they implemented the run and shoot offense. If Chad Kelly can be anywhere close to Jim Kelly, then that'll be an improvement for the Argos. That's for sure.
It just, and obviously the USFL was going through, they just resolved the lawsuit this week, that the new USFL was being sued by the old USFL. And
yeah,
I don't know what lineage they would have been able to talk about this first season, with Chad Kelly and all that. But it is very interesting to me that he chose to go up to the CFL and make a really, we've had, Naylor on and Farhan on, and everyone talking about, it's, 3-4 years to really be a quarterback in the CFL to kind of get there.
It took Warren Moon, a Hall of Famer, 3 or 4 years to get established as the Edmonton, then Eskimos, first string quarterback. And so that should tell you something. But it's not, that's not happening as much anymore. I mean, there are guys who are, well, Rourke is an example. He did sit behind Riley last year, but, he just took off this year. And it's not happening to the same degree as it used to with quarterbacks. Their apprenticeships aren't lasting as long now as they did back then.
I guess this is a good segue anyway, because I was going to ask you about, not having the long apprenticeship. Jake Mayer, we had him on our show back. We had Nathan Rourke on our show preseason. We had Jake Mayer on. I said, I see big things for all you guys. And look at it now. But Jake Mayer, Bo Levi, has he thrown his last pass for Calgary? I mean, it kind of seems like
I don't think so. I'd be stunned if they just suddenly decided to unload Mitchell. I think they're going to stick with him. It's not like they're that bad. They're still, the third best team in the league. So he did not have a stellar game last week. There's no question about it, but they still won. And Mayer is one of the few backup quarterbacks who I think can be depended on in the CFL. He proved himself, and he proved himself quickly too when Mitchell was hurt. So he's another example of a guy who emerged, almost right out of college, and he's a great backup to have. If Mitchell stumbles, you could be sure that Dave Dickinson goes right to Mayer because there are question marks circulating around the CFL right now about Mitchell and his future. But he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best quarterbacks the CFL has ever seen. So if the injuries have caught up to him, if age has caught up to him a little bit, although I don't think so, we'll find out. And then Mayer will come in and we'll see what happens.
Someone tweeted, they said that, maybe Bo just broke the all-time passing record, and it was like, I'm good. Like, I'm fine now. I've done what I need to do.
I think those who know Bo Levi Mitchell and have talked to me about him in the past will tell you he's extremely competitive. Like, he's a cool dude off the field, but on the field, he's extremely competitive. I can't imagine him not trying just because he set any record.
I asked this question to a lot of people. I'll ask it to you as well. Are you a Cody? I can't even say. Are you a Cody Fajardo guy? Like, are you a Cody Fajardo fan? So
I liked him when he was with the Argos. I liked him in college. I think he was at Nevada, and I always liked his two-way ability because I keep telling you that I think that's a key to success for quarterbacks in the CFL. But I clearly see a deterioration in his play with the Roughriders now. In fairness, he's had knee injuries, and I think that they've really affected him. But when he was a backup with Toronto, he could run very, very well. I'm not seeing him do that with the Roughriders anymore, and I'm also not seeing him throw very well either. So I think the Roughriders have some problems, and it starts at quarterback. I think they're going to need to make some changes.
Well, that's, there was the stories in the offseason, Regina's hosting the Grey Cup. Like, they're going to, pay over for the salary cap to make sure that they're going to be in all this. And I was like, the Riders are very on the outside looking in here of this Grey Cup race.
Yeah, they are. It's going to be tough for them. I mean, the crossover possibility is going to help. That they may end up in the Eastern playoffs, but Edmonton could too. I mean, it's crazy, but as bad as they've been this year, they could end up in that crossover position. So I've always thought that the Roughriders have a really good organization. They have the best fans, no offense, the best fans in the CFL. But I don't think right now that they're a very good football team, and I think you're going to see changes there.
Yeah, it's hard. Cody, like even this week, like it's fine. Like, I mean, he should be called, Cody fine, Mason fine. Like, it's like, it's fine. Like, they pulled me from the game. It's okay. Like, I'm coming back. I don't like it. It doesn't. I just feel like he needs some more fire there. It just doesn't feel like I want someone like Bo getting pissed off that he got pulled from the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think your best quarterbacks are your fiery ones. It's good to remain unflappable when you give up interceptions or things like that, but you want to get back in there. And I'm not seeing that fire in Fajardo. I think it's a really good observation on your part, Reed.
Before I let you go, we'll talk a couple of big picture things before I let you go. Outside looking in here, right? We had all the CBA talks, a lot of uncertainty going into the season right now that we're, midway through the season, scoring's up. Like, what do you feel about like the health of the CFL? We had a couple hard kind of seasons there.
Well, I'm concerned about the health of the CFL, but having said that, that's not much different than what I've been saying since I started on the beat as a very young guy in 1979. I get a little bit disappointed because I do like the CFL, and those people who know me well know that I'm not a cheerleader in any way. I mean, anybody who knows my coverage of Major League Baseball knows I don't sit around and root for the Toronto team. It's not my nature. But I do root for the CFL because it's Canadiana, and I do want it to succeed. And I've had some great memories in my years covering the league. I think I covered 25 Grey Cup games. I do want to see it succeed again. I wish back in the as a main staple in particular in Eastern Canada, because it's not that bad in Western Canada. But I do get troubled nowadays when I see a lot of empty seats at these games. I even saw them in Vancouver, and that bothered me because the Lions were playing great football, entertaining football. Rourke was, just as we've already said, something that, something special. And I still saw empty seats in Vancouver, and I've seen empty seats in Winnipeg, and what a dominant team they are. Not as many as elsewhere, I might say, but still, I'm seeing too many empty seats. There are more empty seats than filled seats in eastern cities, specifically Toronto. And I find that really, the only word I can think of is sad. And I do know that the league is going to, at some point, say, we can't afford to lose this kind of money anymore. Right now, it's a survival instinct, as it has been since, for decades. We'll see. Hope they can. And I guess that's a challenge for Randy Ambrosie, because I don't think he wants to be the guy under whom the league folds.
I mean, what do you, we had a commissioner on the show, before the season. We were excited to kind of get that, working hard towards that. Like, what do you make of Ambrosie? And I mean, it's been a lot of, we had the COVID year, and we had the XFL year, and then we had the CBA year. I mean, it's been a lot on his plate. How do you think he's navigated all that?
Oh, I mean, if I had to give him a mark out of 10 or something like that, I'd probably give him a 7, because in Western Canada, the league is still topical, I think. It's not as popular as it may have been at one point, or maybe as it should be. But I still think he's done a pretty good job. We're not hearing these crazy stories about him that we've heard about some of his predecessors, and the fact that they weren't handling things properly. The only thing that from a negative perspective that I heard about Randy Ambrosie was that, and for some reason this hasn't been covered in the mainstream media at all, but I was told that there was an investigation conducted on him because there had been complaints about what some people perceived as bullying tactics. And so some people in the league had complained about him. But, he's still there. So I'm assuming the investigation concluded. I do think that you're not seeing as many public comments from him as you have in the past. Whether that's related to the investigation or not, I don't know.
I hear that a lot where, and now that the season's gone, I mean, like I know he was on ours and he was on the Tie Cats, and I know he's making appearances, but it doesn't feel, I don't know, because I don't know what the CFL commissioner does every day, but I'm like, what, during the CBA talks or whatever, it's like, are we talking? But, they had like all the NDA stuff with the XFL and no one could talk about anything. I don't know, I just feel like it's been a weird, like, 3 years to grade coverage on, if anyone.
But that's always been the case, Reed, when it comes to the CFL. We used to call it the CFL, the Crisis Football League. I mean, there's always some kind of odd issue involved. I was covering the league when it expanded to the United States, and people think that was a failure and that it went miserably. But the truth of the matter is that John Tory, who is now the mayor of Toronto and was the volunteer commissioner of the CFL at that time, was brilliant in that regard, because everybody who came into the CFL from the United States had to pay franchise fees of 7 figures. And those franchise fees kept the CFL afloat. And so if it wasn't for that, I don't know that we'd have a CFL right now. I mean, I was covering this team when the Montreal Alouettes, a professional football team, actually they were the Montreal Concords at that time, ran out of footballs. They didn't have a football, so they couldn't practice. Literally. There was, and Tory came right out and said, I don't know if we're going to be able to pay the players next week. So there were very serious threats to the league's existence back then. So now, I mean, considering, they've come quite a way, and I don't think Ambrosie's doing a bad job. I mean, at least I don't know what he's doing when it comes to bullying. I hope he's not doing that. That's something I'm just not privy to. But if you look at the stability of the league, I mean, he's trying what he can. I don't blame him for at least exploring the XFL idea. He was getting pressure from owners in the league to at least listen to the XFL offers. So that's part of crisis management. I think it would be disastrous. I would hate it if the CFL were to merge with the XFL. I would absolutely loathe it. If the Canadian rules were to be eliminated, I don't know if I could stomach that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the NFL. I'll watch the USFL. I like football, period. I love college football. But the CFL rules they're to me special. And that's what makes the game as exciting for me as it is. So I don't want to see the game, and nothing personal against you, Reed, but I don't want to see the game Americanized. So I hope Randy Ambrosie continues to stay away from that.
Yeah, it's the interesting. First off, I mean, you were the podcast we did during that time, during the March. What was that? Yeah, March, April, May kind of. I mean, that was the best time to podcast about anything, because any theory was out there. No one was saying, then of course they came out later and they, asked Ambrosie, how long did the merger talks last? And he's like 5 minutes or something. You're like, well, I mean, we got about 50 hours.
I don't think that was totally true. I think they lasted longer, and largely because MLSE, the Argos owners, wanted it to last longer. They thought this was a chance to make a little bit more money.
Yeah, we got a lot of like, well, how would you feel if, some Europe team bought the NFL and did it? I'm like, I don't, but I'm not a Canadian that values the Canadian Football League as, part of my heritage and my identity. Like, I don't view the NFL as this mainstay, American thing that is part of my core of, I mean, I'm a fan of the Washington Commanders. There was the football team. There was the like. I don't, I mean, change happens to all of us, but I certainly understand and heard a lot of the Canadians being very upset about the 3 downs and all that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be disastrous for a lot of us. Let's put it like that. But if you're a businessman or if you're a commissioner, you have to consider options, just as John Tory and his owners did back in the mid-90s when the league added American franchises. Without those franchises, I don't know if there'd be a league today.
Before I let you go, so talking about that, and obviously, expansion and the CFL, whatever, I think you have to get to 10 teams clearly before you look outside of anything else. But
Agreed.
The idea of, having American, or if we look at smaller, border towns or whatever you want to look at it, but, trying to do an American expansion now versus 40 years ago. I mean, it's a long time ago that we trying to do that again now with the way the world is now versus the way it was in the 80s. Or 90s, right? 92. When was it? 90.
95, I believe.
95. I get my. Sorry, I got
double check.
I got my USFL. Don't murder me. I got my.
There
USFL
will be a lot of people watching your podcast who will be saying, York doesn't know what he's talking about yet. But I think it's 95.
95 to 8. Yeah.
You know what? I would like to see the CFL satisfy Canadians first now. I think it's really important to expand the league, like you just said, Reed. And I think a Canadian city is where the league should expand to. And, I've been hearing Halifax forever. I mean, the late J.I. Albrecht, who was once the general manager of the Alouettes and once the general manager of the Argonauts, tried to put together a group that was going to form what he called the Schooners. The Schooners, that's how he pronounced it. And unfortunately, it never happened. And this was, 40 years ago. So there's obviously some stumbling blocks to expanding to Halifax. But I certainly would hope that we see another Canadian team in the next little while. Maybe that would generate some extra interest.
Well, that would certainly be a ratings boost if you could get the 10th CFL.
Yeah,
that would be. Well, Marty, I appreciate it. Hopefully, we can have you on again, and it won't take me, 2.5 years, 3 years to track you down. We'll find, now we know each other. But I really appreciate your time and the work that you've done covering the league for as long as you have and coming on today. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Reed. Anytime. Thank you.
Well, I am thrilled today. We have the big man of the Alouettes, David Côté. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. So have you even had to pay for a meal or a beer this week, or is everyone just treating you for your big performance?
No, I still have to pay everything. I got some beer from my friend, but other than that, I'm paying for my food.
We have there's an American saying I still put on my pants one leg at a time. I still just normal. We have the big game winning kick against the Ticats. Talk me through kind of how is everything going here following the big game.
It was a great game all the way long. We're exchanging points and everything, and at the end of the game, they made a 51-yard field goal to take the lead. So as soon as they did that, we know we had I think 50 seconds to go throughout the field and try to kick a game winner. And our offense did that. They got us 2 or 3 first down and made us in a position to have a kick. And the rest is as what we've seen during on the Instagram or all social media, the kick and everything was perfect. The long snap, the hold, the block, everything was perfect, and it ended a perfect night with all the fans and everything. So it was a great moment.
How do you handle that kind of pressure being put on your shoulders?
Honestly, probably everyone around me is more nervous than me when that happened. I don't know if I'm a low profile guy during live, so I'm not very stressed or everything. But let's say I'm like in my zone during the game, so I'm really very focused, like not on the score or the outcome of the game, but I was just going out there, do another field goal like I did previously or like I did in practice. So honestly, I wasn't really nervous at the time of the kick, so that probably helped me a lot.
And then afterward now, I mean, I'm sure you've had reporters talking to you and everyone else in your team. I mean, what's it now, a couple days removed from the big game?
I had some friends that reached out to me, some old coach and all the people I know here in Quebec and Montreal, a bunch of guys, even other kicker from the league that reached out to me just to say congrats. And so that's really nice. That's a good time to, especially we're in bye week now, so I received a couple of texts here and there. That's nice to have this appreciation from other people.
Well, because I worried because we've been big supporters of the Alouettes all season. I've had a lot of your teammates on. We had Gary Stern, the owner, on a couple weeks ago, and you guys had the big win against Winnipeg, and then I'm like, we're going to go into Hamilton, fight Hamilton. You got to keep the momentum going. Like, was there, following the team's first win, against Winnipeg, going into Hamilton, was there added pressure to kind of keep that momentum going?
I don't think it was like more pressure. I think we're very confident about this team since the beginning of season, and the win against Winnipeg gave us a great boost. We're really confident, and we work hard during the week, and we knew that if we played well, we were able to beat them. So it wasn't as easy as we thought. We didn't have to make it like the last game, but we made it through, and like we're coming through and get the win. So that's the most important thing.
What's the season been like for you so far up till now?
Now we're 4-6, so it's been like up and down, and so yeah, I think it's the first time of season we're like having 2 wins in a row. So that's good. For me personally, it's nice to win, obviously, but for the team too, it's a good momentum and a good boost of energy for the back 9 of the season.
You guys have had a little bit of, shakiness, right? Coaches, changes, all that kind of stuff. Now, do you feel like you're in your groove, that you guys are going on a good path?
Yeah, I think so. I think it took us a while to like figure it out, and because I think on paper we have a really good team. Like you check all the depth chart and everything, we have some great players like all over the board. But it was tough during game. Like you probably saw, it was tough. Sometimes you watching a game, you're like, this team is probably better than that, but we're not doing like the right thing at the right time. But I think, those 2 wins, it's a major change in the season, and I think it's good for the rest of the season, and it can help us for sure.
What do you like about the CFL and the time that you've spent there so far?
Honestly, it's really nice. It's like the atmosphere, the guys, you make new friends, you create contacts and everything. And honestly, what I've been saying is like when you're playing in college, but you just don't have school with that. So you which is like the perfect mix. The school is important and everything. If you want to reach pro level, you need to go by school, which is perfect in my opinion. But once you get there, you can focus only on football. Especially me, like I'm not from Montreal, so when I go there, I'm in my thing. I'm alone. I don't have anyone to like worry about. I don't have kids, so I can only focus like on training, get my body right, and work. And so that's really helping me, and that's very cool. That's a nice job to have.
Mentality now with your team, right? Everyone in the locker room, and I know you guys are on the bye week this week, but obviously you've been talking to people, whatever. Like, you do feel like you guys, like you said, the pendulum swung. Good momentum here for the back half of the season. Yeah,
I think so. The guy, like, we were happy to have a bye week to get a rest and everything because we've played 6 weeks in a row, but I think we're thrilled to go back on the field next week, and we can't wait for the next game to like continue to build on this 2-win streak.
Tim Capper, who's he hosts the Alouettes Fight Tech podcast, right? He covers your team, and he's a friend of the show. Put out that it was the most people you guys have had for a home game, I believe, since like 2017. I want to say, I don't want to misquote, but it's been one of the higher crowds you guys have had. Like, do you guys feel that energy and the crowd? And I know Gary Stern is out there going crazy on Twitter and yelling at Milt Stegall and everything else. Like, what do you make of just we're trying to fill the stadium, kind of build back the Alouettes?
Honestly, it was awesome. It's been a long time since I've seen a crowd like that in Montreal, and that's a good thing. So the people are starting to coming back at the stadium. We're always talking about team in the West, Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, a big crowd, and like they disturb you and everything. But I think last game our fans disturbed Hamilton. I think they had a false start late in the game because they weren't ready or they were confused, and that's probably because of the fans. So that's really nice to have them be on our back, and that was a boost in the game for sure. Like the last 3 minutes of the game, it was very loud. Everyone was on their feet yelling, and that was really nice, and that's good for the organization as well, because it's been like a couple tough years. So to have people back in the stand, that's going to create a great movement, I think.
Are you pro air horn or anti air horn?
Honestly, when I'm on the field, I'm pro because I don't really hear them. But when you watch the game, like afterward or you saw clips, I think people find it really annoying. It's very tough to like to say my choice. But I will say if I'm on the field and it don't disturb me, so you can continue, so it disturb the other team more. But I know people on TV have a tough time with that. I think I saw that on Twitter.
I'm not from, I'm from Seattle. I don't know a lot of this stuff, but we have this poutine helmet now floating around in the stadium, right? Now, is that, do you like the idea of this poutine helmet? Do you enjoy poutine? I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You should try it sometime when if you're coming more on the east side on the East Coast. But it's really good, and I think that was a good publicity with the team to have the helmets and everything. That's a good souvenir to buy at the stadium. You eat the poutine and you have the bowl for tailgate at home, and when you receive people, so that's a good thing. But poutine is really good. Not really healthy, but that's really good.
Yeah, it's really not healthy, right? It's really bad for you, right?
Yeah, no, that's not good. Only during bye weeks.
Yeah. What do you guys like in the locker room? Just hanging out with the guys, the mentality of the team when you're not on the field. What do you guys like to do, or what's the general vibe?
Honestly, that's a very good vibe. People are saying like later in the locker room, sometimes we can believe that after practice, everyone is leaving on their side and nobody's talking, and it's just like we're doing our job and we're leaving. But people are staying. We watch them together. We're talking about lives and everything, and there's a very good chemistry in the team. And I'm surprised about the image I had from the pro football. It was like everyone on his own because it's like your job. You're competing against another guy, but that's really not the case, and that's pretty cool. That's kind of what we find during a college season. Maybe not as much because you don't have the class and everything with the guys, but there's a good chemistry. And even that after practice, we go to a restaurant. When we have some off time, we go play golf. We're doing some activities together to try to build a chemistry.
So you guys coming back next week, you're playing the Red Blacks are coming in, right? Playing you guys. I feel good about that. I feel good about this win streak now you guys are on. I do think there's going to be some momentum there. Thoughts? I mean, I know you're on the bye. We don't want to talk next week yet, whatever, but heading back in, and what are you looking forward to down the stretch?
Honestly, that's going to be a tough game because what we said, every game is tough in the CFL this year. There's no big win by 35, 40 points. It's always close games. And Ottawa are a really good team, even if their record are not is not showing that. But I think it's going to be a tough game, but if we can build on this momentum of 2 wins in a row and come after bye week, have some time to rest. We had some time to rest during the week, and we're going to be more fresh. I think it can be a good opportunity to like move up to a 3rd win in a row and build on that for the rest of season. Because, as you know, the nobody in the East right now is like going away with the first place. I think the first team is 4-6 like us, so the first place is wide open. So it's going to be a good way to go in the last stretch of season with 2 wins in a row, a bye week to rest, and a good game at home again. That's going to help us for sure.
Well, I hate to tell you, you're going to run into a brick wall when the BC Lions come into town. So the winning will stop. That we're going to be playing with all the love of Nathan Rourke on the shoulders, if we're going to be in angry mode coming in. But it should be good. I'm excited. You are phenomenal for being, like you said, not only speaking English during the season, being French speaking. Phenomenal job. Do people realize, I guess, the work and how hard that is to be able to kind of Duolingo and do all these reporter interviews and everything else you have to do?
I think people realize it. There are like some guys on the team try to learn a couple words in French here and there, but and they given us some slack too. Sometimes we don't I understand most of it and I'm able to speak, but as you see, I have big accent and sometimes words are tough to pronounce, but I'm getting by, and that's pretty cool. That's very useful to me to be able to speak French and English. Like French, it's really cool when you're in Quebec City or in Montreal, but if you don't go in France, you don't need French. So you need to speak English at some point if you want to work or to travel. So that's just a plus.
The only time I ever used French, I had a layover in Paris, and I was so excited I was going to impress this girl, and I was going to order a gin and tonic, and I completely did it wrong, and they had no idea what I was saying. And they said, "Why don't we just get that for you in English?" So you do much better than I am, and the credit there. So
yeah, it's tough it's tough. Sometimes French is way tougher than English with the pronunciation and everything.
Well, David, I really appreciate your time today, taking time on the bye week. I know there's a lot of other stuff you could be doing, so I really appreciate it. I do mean this. The Alouettes, we're big fans on the podcast. We've had a lot of your teammates on, and so I really appreciate that. Rooting for you guys down the way in the East. As long as BC can hold the West, you guys can have the East. That's just fine.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was very cool. Thank you.
Want to thank all of our guests today. Dave Naylor, as always, even though he didn't have a guitar like he had on the CFL on TSN panel last week. Really appreciate Dave Naylor's time. Really appreciate Jake Russell stopping by, and obviously Marty York. Really great catching up with him. Like I said, still learning my way through the history of CFL media, media analysts and commentators and all that stuff. So really appreciate Marty. And then David Côté, great. I think David was a great interview. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. Whether you're, with the CFL or not, I thought David was a phenomenal person, bilingual, living in Montreal, living his best life, kicking game-winning field goals for the CFL. So I really appreciate that. So as I said off the top, this is going to be our big giveaway item that we're going to be giving away for the 2,500 subscriber. I said Brian Scott is going to be signing this. I'm going to mail it to him. I want to get Brian. Maybe we could take a photo with it as well, kind of for proof of the validity of the signature. But what's cool about this ball? So I was corresponding with Brian about it. Brian remembers this game because this is a very specific, right? It's from the Veterans Day game because remember the Spring League played in the fall of 2020 back when the colleges, right? They were going to take time off. That's when Paul and I started talking about the Spring League because we thought then the XFL was coming. Remember back in 2021. But Brian remembers this game. He says he threw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, totally went off. Brian very much remembers this game. This is a real ball from the real game that Brian played in. So it even makes more sense. I said, this is literally the perfect ball for Brian Scott to sign. Spring League, I keep wanting to say USFL MVP, but Spring League MVP, maybe one day USFL MVP, but Brian is going to sign this, but I want to showcase this off. This is what you're going to get. So like and subscribe, be a part of the community here. That's all you have to do. I just spent a lot of money and time kind of procuring all of these items. a lot of Spring League merchandise went off on eBay this week, so I've been corresponding with them, getting a lot of that stuff. And he was so kind to give me a discount for some of these just because I told them that these were going to be giveaway items for our listeners. Showcasing here some other items. I also have Spring League practice squad jerseys coming, like a whole box of them, supposedly some other treasure trove items in there. So I'm probably going to be using those as kind of giveaway items. Maybe if we do like a live show, you stop by, kind of giving them away that way. But I'm going to figure out, and I want you guys to figure out with me how we're best going to give away these items. So the football is for the 2,500 subscriber. We understand that. But I have 4 brand new, well, they're not brand new, but they're game used, but authentic Spring League jerseys. So I have 2. These are all size large. Now, to preface, it is a very tight large. I tried to put on the large. I'm not the largest of people, but I tried to put on the large very tight. So I actually ordered my own double XL, I believe, of the Jousters. So I actually have one to wear. But just keep that in mind. This might be more of a hanging item than a wearing item. I think Dorothy could wear one of these as like a tight-fitting dress. But I have 2 Spring League blues. I know Jenna has her eyes on these. Spring League. I mean, these are like, they're game used, but they're like impeccable condition. You know, we've got the stitching and all that, a little bit of marks on them to show that they're real. We have the Generals jersey. This is not Brian Scott's number, but an authentic. I mean, you just close your eyes, pretend it's Brian Scott. I mean, can't you just see Brian Scott running down the field right now? I think Brian was number 12, right? I think he was 12. What number were you, Brian? And then this is the creme de la creme. I might need to figure out a way that we can rig this to give this to Kenny, but this is the first time I've ever held this, shown this in person. This is a beautiful jersey. The Spring League Jousters jersey. This is the one I was going to keep, but I am too large for the large. It's very tight. So I am ordering one because I would like to be able to wear it on the podcast, and this would not be a good look if I had this one on. But I'm going to give this away. So one of you is also going to have a real-life Jousters jersey in your possession. I want you to figure out what we're going to do with that. But remember, the Spring League football, that is going to be for the 2,500 subscribers. So like and subscribe, share the episode. The more views we can get, the more people. I would like to hit 2,500 before the XFL kicks off here. I think that's a pretty doable goal, but like and subscribe, let's get us there. And all you have to do is be subscribed, be a part of the community, and you'll be eligible to win the Spring League football. I have another big announcement coming up next week. I think I'm working on something behind the scenes, working on promoting more of the alternative football news and media that a lot of us are doing online. I think that's going to come next week. I have everything kind of ready to drop, but working on the finishing touches with that. I got some other work I got to get done today, but I should have another big announcement next week. Big subscriber update. I think that's all the prefacey stuff. I got a good text today. Could potentially have a really big guest coming up here in 2 weeks. So look forward to that before the Friday after the Thursday night NFL kickoff. So really exciting stuff here on the podcast. Thank you all so much for your love and support. Like and subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next week. Thanks again. Take care.